world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, January 12th. Once again, recording a little later than I planned. Probably going to get this up much later today than I anticipated, but I promised you guys a daily show, and you will have a daily podcast to the best of my ability. Now, as I say every day, we've got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about, especially with this administration. I want to start off talking about a conversation I had today with a coworker of mine. And of course, as always, don't give any names or identifying information really, other than was talking to her and she has family in Minneapolis. And they're terrified up there, apparently. And she's terrified here about what is going on, especially in regards to ICE. How ICE is up there going into places like churches and daycare centers and hospitals and things. They're effectively trying to go door to door. And that's something J.D. Vance had talked about sending ICE door to door basically to collect papers, which is very reminiscent of what the Nazi Party did in 1930s, 1940s Germany. They went door to door demanding papers. And if you couldn't provide your papers or things like that, you were hauled off. And of course, most of the people inside Germany didn't entirely know what was going on. They were being told things like, you're being repatriated to other countries, or we're going to send you over and we're just going to have you live over in Poland or Austria or somewhere else, and we'll take care of you. What they didn't know is those people were being sent to the camps. And it didn't start with the final solution. The final solution, of course, being the Holocaust, and where they decided to start killing all of the residents of the camp, the Jewish people, the political dissidents, the old, etc. At first, it was literally just relocation, but as the war crept on and they were losing, that is part of where the final solution came into play. Now, with everything going on in Minnesota, according to my coworker, her family up there is terrified because of ICE. And she straight up told me today, she's like, what's next? Is there going to be armed people wandering our little town? And our town's not very big, right? Like, I mean, ICE could come in, probably roll through the entire town, maybe in a day. If they were really trying to be thorough, they could do it in a little while. It wouldn't take very long. But we're not the type of place that is a target for ICE. There's not a big manufacturing plant here. There is not a huge Hispanic population here. There'd be no reason. But the fact of the matter is, you have people all over this country that are now terrified of what this administration is doing. And it's going to come down to, at some point, they are going to have to stop him. Congress is going to have to do something and put up some kind of a roadblock, whether that is an impeachment, whether that is the 25th Amendment. And of course, we're always hoping for the Big Mac to get him. But see, this whole thing, they're not afraid right now. ICE is not afraid. Republicans, they're not afraid. They want us to be afraid. And why is our people like ICE not afraid? Well, it's because right now they know they have got their boy Donald Trump and his appointees in place in the federal government, that they're safe. The guy who shot Renee Good in Minneapolis, he is probably never going to face federal charges right now. Not when you have the president, the vice president, and the attorney general, among others, all coming out saying we support what he did. He trying to classify what happened as domestic terrorism, or that it was self defense. That she was trying to run him over with her car, which she clearly was not. She wasn't even in a bad mood. She just wanted to be on her way. Um, so they have people terrified right now, and that's part of what they want. Now, I saw a creator on TikTok talking about how it's a evident martial law is coming, and it's not. Okay, they may try, it will not work. There is not enough members of the military, including National Guard, for them to be able to successfully hold this country with martial law. Martial law means military rule. That would be suspending the Constitution, and they can't do that, right? Not with the limited, even though they have way advanced firepower, they do not have the numbers in order to go against all of us. And if they really tried to go against everybody, I tend to believe that a bunch of the people on their side, the MAGAs, would actually come around if push came to shove, and they tried to invoke pure military rule, similar to some other countries. Um, while they are misguided in a lot of things, I think ultimately, if it came down to defending, especially at the local level, when it came down to defending themselves and their people, the people they know, the people in their town, their community, that they would actually do that, because then they would see what is going on. They may not go beyond the edges of their town to help anybody, but or the edges of where they know people anyway, because they don't think that far ahead. They don't think of people in the broad sense, um, but that they would defend themselves. Now, I do not expect any sort of military movement. We're going to get to November. We are going to have the midterms, and the first step in getting rid of this regime is going to be holding the midterms and putting the Democrats back in charge of one, or if not both, branches of Congress. Now, one of the things about why ICE is not afraid, and I talked about it on yesterday's podcast, but I'm going to touch on it now, and that's because a large chunk of the paramilitary groups that we need to look at in this country when this is all said and done, and we need to figure out, I know there's free speech and things like that, but these groups need to be considered dangerous, and maybe we need to see if there's a way to limit their activities. And they've been around for a long time. These groups that they train in drills, and they were never good enough to make the military, or they couldn't give up their military glory days, but a lot of them couldn't make the military, so they formed these para groups like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, Patriot Front, and a few others, and they act like a military. They train, they are run on a command structure, etc. And they like to think that they're doing something, right? But we haven't heard much from any of them. They haven't been out really at any of the protests against Donald Trump. You haven't heard of them showing up. They've been hiding away, or at least it appears that way. Now, some of them, especially the ones that were pardoned by Donald Trump for their actions around January 6th, 2021, could have said, okay, I'm not going back to prison, and have decided that they're not doing anything. They're going to sit and be, calm, and they're staying out of the fray. Some of them got jobs with ICE. We're already hearing that ICE has had to, in order to get the numbers that they want, they've had to ease up on the requirements in order to be able to join. They don't have the numbers of people who are fully qualified to, run the mile in the time that they need, or do the push-ups, sit-up combos, just meet the physical requirements of the job, and they've had to relax them a ways. Now, one of the ways they were talking about it a couple of months back when this came out that they were relaxing the requirements is they said, we have a lot of applicants who are athletically allergic, which is a pleasant way of saying they're out of shape. And coming from somebody who is out of shape himself, I am by no means skinny or fit. Uh, I don't think I could do what ICE is being required to do, but I also don't want to. Now, we have heard, and I talked about it on yesterday's podcast, about how ICE used to have an 18-week training course, is what it took to be a full agent, that they have shrunk that down to 47 days. Think about that, 47 days, a month and a half. Now, I realize you're going to have days off in there for weekends, etc. So let's just round it up. Nice and even, 2 months from 18 weeks. That's less than half the time of training than what they had before. And I don't even know if 18 weeks was enough, because we see all the time that law enforcement does not always know the laws they are trying to enforce, that they're not as well trained as, say, the attorneys that have to defend the people that get arrested or prosecute the people that get arrested. So with these paramilitary people being part of ICE, fear is one of the motivators. And you've seen clips now of basically these ICE agents saying things like, well, you wouldn't be any fun anyway. There was somebody that got let go from ICE, and I don't entirely remember the full context, but they were arguing in ICE's face, basically telling them to get the fuck out of their town, etc. And was going to push back against them, but then said, "Well, you wouldn't be any fun anyway." They want people afraid. They want people terrified. They get off on the fear and the terror, and we can't let them know that they're making us afraid. Ultimately, at some point, maybe before, but probably after this administration is gone, all the people involved in ICE and everywhere up and down that chain of command, starting with Donald Trump, if he is still alive at the end of this administration, if he makes it that far, still don't know how well his health is going to hold up. I don't know that he lives to the end of his term, but if he does, starting with him, including Kristi Noem and others down the chain, are going to have to face very serious questions and consequences. And one of the things I talked about a little bit ago is that they know right now they have Donald Trump at the top. They have Pam Bondi at the DOJ, Kash Patel at the FBI. They're not getting investigated for the things that are going on right now on the federal level, and that those people at the federal level are blocking state level charges. But those people aren't going to be around forever. Come January 20th, 2029, Donald Trump is going to be gone. Period. We are just over 3 years away from the end of his second term. Despite any bluster he may have about running for a third term, there is no way he can run for a third term. The Republicans are going to have to run somebody different. And I don't know who they can run with how bad things are right now. Anybody they run, unless it is somebody who has been outside of politics for at least Donald Trump's entire administration, I don't know if any of them have a chance, just because the Republicans are going to be seen as culpable of everything Donald Trump has said and done. So I think Democrats are going to win in 2028, period. And when they do, they're going to bring in a whole new administration, a whole new DOJ, a new head of the FBI. Because if Kash Patel isn't fired by the end of this administration, and I think there's a good chance that Donald Trump does fire him because of how bad Patel makes Donald Trump look, that the next president, probably a Democrat, is going to appoint somebody new. And it would be the first time a Democrat has appointed a head of the FBI in decades. Normally, it is just a Republican who appoints a new head of the FBI, and the Democrat just keeps reappointing whoever that is, because usually they do a decent enough job. It isn't until you get somebody as incompetent as Donald Trump putting in even more incompetent people that a change like that would have to be made. So it's entirely possible that the next Democratic president would bring in a new head of the FBI, but they'd also bring in somebody new at the DOJ, a new attorney general. And we need somebody who is an attack dog, who would go after everybody involved with what is going on in this administration. They need to be reminded that they are not above the law. And we need to have very public um, congressional hearings, similar to what we did with January 6th, a big investigation, and something similar to a Nuremberg style tribunal or a court setup. Now, Congress may have to pass something establishing another court to specifically deal with everything coming from this administration. But that's the thing. Congress does have the ability to do that, and by setting up a special court specifically for um, all of the problems stemming from this administration, if they go that route, they could appoint a certain number of judges, set it up in one location, and everything, and then it wouldn't disrupt the flow of cases into other jurisdictions about other things that are going on and other things that this administration is trying to do. Now, multiple states have sued Donald Trump over his use of ICE and trying to get ICE out of their state. And I don't know how that case is going to play out. Um, in part because of the supremacy clause. The federal government is supreme over the states, and when it comes to immigration, they can always claim national security. Problem is, judges are getting fed up with this national security claim. Donald Trump is trying to use national security claims for literally everything he is doing. And not there is no way that all of these things fall under the banner in the guise of national security. But that's looking toward 2028. First things we got to do is get to the midterms. Okay. Midterms are coming this fall in November. We are about 10 months away. And uh, Republicans are looking at getting blown out. They just don't realize it yet. It is going to be bad for the Republican Party, and they keep doing things like backing the dumb moves Donald Trump is making in order in that it's going to just cost them. I'm already thinking that the midterms could be 40 to 50 seat in the House of Representatives, all flipping to Democrats, and that's not counting what could happen because of gerrymandering. Um, and then there's always the chance that the Senate flips as well. Now, uh, with that being said, as we're watching the midterms play out as it gets closer, expect the Republicans to start panicking a little bit and starting to do things that would potentially mean that they are ready to walk away from Donald Trump. And we're seeing some of that. We're seeing both sides coming out of the Republican Party, actually, but some are digging in deeper and others are breaking away. Look what happened last week when the House passed the ACA subsidies for a 3-year extension. Donald Trump says he may veto it. We talked about that, I believe, on either yesterday's podcast or the day before. But Donald Trump says he may veto any extension of the ACA subsidies. And I think they could get around that by telling him, hey, look, we're just going to put your name on it. We're going to call it Trump Care. You'll be sung as a hero. You'll get some good press. And that's all he needs. He needs a little pat on the back and told that he's a good boy. And suddenly he's on board and he is willing to do whatever is necessary to make that happen. Donald Trump is very pliable when it comes to getting him to do what you want. You just have to know how to work him. Um, you talk to him in a certain manner and say this or that, and you can get him to do about whatever you want. Now, where a lot of people get it wrong is they think he is outright evil in himself, and he is not. He's just dumb and being used by evil people. Now, some of the things that they are talking him into doing, would he be willing to do on his own? Yes. But the fact that it is very easy for them to manipulate him into doing these things. But I was talking about Congress and how they are uh, working with Donald Trump. Some of them are working with, and some of them are starting to buck things. Okay. Well, one of the things that came out, and I did a TikTok on this, um, is this story that Randy Fine, a representative from Florida, a Republican, came out and said they are going to be introducing a bill in Congress that would give Donald Trump any and all authority to use whatever means necessary in order to acquire Greenland. Now, we've been talking a lot about Greenland the last few days, ever since everything that happened in Venezuela. Donald Trump now has his eyes set on that next prize. And this is a problem for Donald Trump because he thinks it's going to be a winning strategy, but it could end up, and it will end up fracturing a lot of our alliances. Uh, Greenland is owned by Denmark. The people of Greenland do not wish to join the United States. They have said as much repeatedly. And I don't know how much clearer they need to be. However, because we know Donald Trump is more than likely in the Epstein files for doing a whole bunch of horrendous things to underage women who probably tried telling him no. And we know about what happened in the department store dressing room with E. Jean Carroll. Drew a blank there for half a second. That Donald Trump doesn't like the word no. So he's going to keep pushing. Now, Randy Fine is saying they're introducing a bill to let Donald Trump do whatever is necessary to acquire Greenland, and was actually talking about the ability to make Greenland the 51st state. First of all, like I said, Greenland does not want to join the United States. Second, what do they mean by anything? What do they mean by any means necessary? Okay. Is that a full on military invasion? Is that money? Because normally spending from Congress has to be doled out. They have to be specific, at least in maybe not down to the penny as far as what goes where, but at least specific enough of we are giving you this much money to this group for whatever. And if they are going to do any extra spending on defense, they would need to authorize it through Congress and say, okay, we are increasing the defense budget by this much for this reason, which would be to go after Greenland. And if they don't do it, the Treasury, under normal circumstances, would not let that money out. However, we know that Donald Trump has nothing but loyalists in there who are unqualified for the positions they are in. And they are going to probably do whatever they want. So this whole situation is putting the world on edge. Now, if we go in and do anything militarily in Greenland, NATO has said they would come to Denmark's aid. And of course, this would probably mean the end of NATO. Now, Donald Trump has said he doesn't know why NATO would go against him. He thinks he should get the credit for saving NATO, and I don't know where he gets that from, other than one of those talking points from his first administration, where he kept saying that NATO wasn't spending enough money and that he was the one who got them to increase their spending, which is partially true. Now, the way he kept talking about NATO was as if it was a giant checking account, and it's not. Okay, NATO is an alliance. It is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and you guys mostly all know, or you should know, what NATO is. And basically, it's just a mutual defense agreement where we've agreed under certain conditions we would defend each other no matter what. And it's helped keep the peace in Europe and the world for the better part of 70 years, almost 80 years at this point, after the end of World War II. Um, but the thing is, what Donald Trump is talking about when it comes to them paying more money is the fact that a lot of the member nations, because they are not as wealthy as the United States and they did not have the tax revenue that the United States had, they were not spending the required 2% of their GDP on defense. They were spending it on other programs. And Donald Trump kept pressuring them to spend more money on defense. Now, I personally think the reason he was pressuring so hard was because he was convinced that NATO was like a big checking account, or that they had a checking account, and he was going to try to figure out a way to grift from it. And when that didn't work, of course, he's come back and he's gone back and forth, and he says, well, NATO should be thanking me. I saved them. Except let's look at what happened with Joe Biden. Under Joe Biden, we added Finland and Sweden to NATO, adding in 2 new countries, bringing the total to 32. And if it wasn't for the war going on with Ukraine and Russia, there's a good chance Ukraine would have already been a member nation. Um, However, that is also a sticking point for Russia. Russia does not want the United States to admit Ukraine into NATO. Um, Basically says, well, if we're going to leave Ukraine high and dry, because they really don't want that threat sitting there, because they may want to attack Ukraine again. I think that's a big chunk of it. So Donald Trump wants credit for saving NATO, and then comes out and also says in the same post on Truth Social that, well, I like NATO. I've always liked NATO, which isn't true. But then, do we really know if they would come to our aid if we need it? Would they really be there for us? And that's the point when I have to remind you of Article 5 of the NATO Charter. It says that an attack against one member nation is an attack against all. In the entirety of NATO's history, Article 5 has only ever had to be invoked once, and the NATO member states came to the aid of the country that invoked it. And who might that country be? Well, that was the United States of America. We invoked the NATO Charter after 9/11. We called on our allies, and they helped us in what ended up being a forever war in Afghanistan, and I think they also helped us in Iraq. But we used that charter. We're the only country to use the NATO charter like that. And yet Donald Trump has the nerve to come out and say, well, would they really help us? They've already proven they would help us. But Donald Trump, being the type of person he is, he really, even though he says he likes NATO, he doesn't. And that's been proven time and time again by the rhetoric he has. That, um, you know, he's now trying to sow doubt. And we know his mouth breathing base, the Trumplafucks, the MAGAs, they're going to come out and say, well, yeah, what good is NATO anyway? When would they ever defend us? And you could tell them till you're blue in the face about NATO coming to the aid of the United States during and after 9/11, and they won't care. It has gotten to the point with MAGA that they will say and do anything that fits their narrative. They've lost the plot entirely. Going back to this ICE situation for a minute, as I just had this thought pop in my head. Um, we're talking about them going door to door, is what JD Vance has suggested, that they would go door to door and check your papers. And I drew the comparison to 1930s, 1940s Germany. But I remembered something. When it comes to MAGA and it comes to door to door, remember they used to say that during the Obama administration. They used it as a riling point that Obama was going to send the ATF and the FBI door to door, and they were going to take everybody's guns. And they riled people up to the point where we had the most gun sales under any presidential term happened under Obama. More people got terrified of not being able to purchase a gun, and they went out and bought one under the Obama years. And now that they're talking about going door to door, MAGA's turning around saying, well, you should just comply. Where was that same energy? See, they've lost the point entirely. They've lost the plot. They don't know what they're even supposed to be mad about or riled up about. They only know if it comes from certain people. And then, oh, suddenly that's our new outrage point. And then they'll have that talking point for a while until that's not working anymore and people aren't mad enough. And then they turn around and do the same thing with the next talking point and the next talking point and the next talking point. It is ridiculous as far as how they act and how they operate. They have no idea of what it actually means or what they actually want anymore. Some of the things they stand for, they are now cheering against, all because one man told them that that is what they should be doing. I lost my train of thought, but going back to it, we were talking about this whole NATO and Greenland thing. And before my train of thought kind of derailed there for a minute, we were talking about NATO and Greenland. And NATO has said they would defend Greenland. Okay. Donald Trump doesn't understand what would happen if they intervene militarily in Greenland, if they do successfully. I mean, if the people of Greenland were to decide tomorrow to join the United States, and even though Denmark doesn't want to see them go, if it was a democratic decision and Denmark said, okay, we're going to let Greenland go, that would be one thing. But when they're talking about intervening militarily to force Greenland to join us, and Denmark wanting to defend its own territory and call in Article 5, the rest of NATO would act. But they could do something else too. They could do two other things. They could turn around and, first of all, they own a significant portion of our debt. Okay, I've talked about it before. The United States borrows a lot of money. We are 20-some trillion dollars in the hole at this point and growing every single year. And of course, Republicans never have a plan to actually fix that other than to cut spending, when the plan should be to increase revenue. But we have to borrow money. And a lot of times we borrow money from our allies. Why? Because A, they have it to spare, and B, we offer them a pretty good return on the investment, and you would keep borrowing it. Reminds me of a former coworker I had. He used to borrow people money, okay? And he would constantly borrow out at high interest rates. And I mean, it was effectively loan sharking. But he'd go to him and, we had a coworker that would go up to him all the time and say, hey, I'm a little short on bills this pay period. Can I get $50? And he'd say, sure, pay me back 75 on payday. And like clockwork, payday would come around, they would pay each other back, no problem. Down the road, did it again. And they kept saying, one time the borrower kept asking the lender, he's like, why do you keep lending me money? He goes, well, you've always paid me back. He goes, and when you go higher denominations, you paid those back too. He goes, why wouldn't I keep lending you? And I'm making money in the process. And that's kind of how our allies view us as far as borrowing money. We go to them and say, hey, we need money. We've overspent again. And they say, yeah, sure. Here you go. And then keep paying them interest to keep them happy and they're fine. Well, they could call in all of those debts. And it's not just Denmark. It could be all 32 of the NATO countries, all 31 of the other NATO countries. They could all call in their markers, right? But here's the problem. It's not just NATO that we would have to worry about when they call in the debt. We do have parts of our debt that is owned by places like China, Japan. Not sure who else owns debt to us, but most of the free world has chunks of our debt that we have borrowed them from. We have borrowed from them and we've been paying them interest. But the minute one group starts calling it in and saying, okay, pay us back, the rest are going to do the same. And we're going to go belly up. Pretty much, they could cripple us without ever firing a shot. Because if we don't have anybody to borrow the money from, how are we going to keep paying them back? It becomes a problem. So Donald Trump could lead that to being a major problem. The other thing I talked about in yesterday's podcast is something else they could really do, and that would be kicking us off of all of the bases we have in Europe. And again, it's one of those things that could be a domino, where other countries that we have bases in could also say, "Yeah, come get your people, get them out of here," because we stand in solidarity with NATO. Um, for example, New Zealand and Australia, as an example, could say, "Yeah, you got a base here. Get your people out because we're standing with NATO and we're telling you to get your troops off of our soil, and we're going to be left pretty much alone." And that's another downside to what this administration is doing that they just don't even realize. So Randy Fine is saying he wants to authorize anything to make the use of anything to make Greenland part of the United States. It's not going to happen. This is all about making a headline to make Donald Trump happy. Beyond that, he was talking about the idea of making Greenland a 51st state. Well, in order to do that, they would have to ratify a constitution and they would have to pass something saying that they would like statehood, and then it would go to Congress and Congress would have to approve it. Here's the thing, there's already a group that should be a state already that has been trying to pass a referendum to become a state to get the ball rolling, and that is Puerto Rico. But we don't hear Republicans ever talk about making Puerto Rico a state. They just don't. And if Donald Trump is wanting to have some kind of a legacy and a positive thing he could be known for, and if he wants, maybe he does want to be known for adding a state to the union. Maybe somebody should suggest to him that you want to really help your view with people, make Puerto Rico a state. It's already a territory. But see, he doesn't even know it's a territory because he's said numerous times and he's talked about calling the president of Puerto Rico. Now, what he probably meant was he called the governor of Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico has a governor, but he's the president of Puerto Rico and he doesn't even know it. He doesn't realize it. That's the type of buffoonery we are dealing with here. Okay. Now we are waiting any day for an answer on these tariffs. Supreme Court had heard oral arguments this or end of last year sometime on a case about the tariffs, and it did not seem to go very well for the administration. However, it is never easy to tell what the Supreme Court is thinking based solely on oral arguments because they could say and ask specific questions and still side one way or the other. What I think they're trying to do is figure out a way to not force the government to have to repay the tariffs. However, something came out over the weekend about these tariffs, and it was an article with an interview with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. And Scott Bessent comes out and says a couple of key things. One, he says there's about $774 billion sitting in the Treasury right now. Now, last I knew, because we were in deficit spending, we weren't supposed to have any money sitting in the Treasury. It was supposed to have already been doled out to the varying agencies to pay their bills. Now, maybe that is just uh, money that has not gotten distributed out to the varying agencies that they need. I don't know. I'll be honest on that. I don't know where that 774 billion is coming from. However, the other interesting thing that that Scott Bessent said in this article was that um, there's enough money in the Treasury to end up paying back all of the tariffs that we have collected so far if they are forced to issue refunds. Keep in mind, there's 774 billion with a B in the Treasury, and that's enough to pay back the all of the tariffs since what was it, March 1st or April 1st, whatever date he calls Liberation Day. Now that's a significant amount of money, but that's still way less than what some people have said we made in tariffs. And we had never gotten a full picture, and we still don't have the full picture of how much money the tariffs have brought in. We've heard numbers from anywhere from $200 billion to Donald Trump claiming 19 trillion. Well, if Scott Bessent is saying that $774 billion is enough money to pay back all of the tariff revenue, then that means we never came close to that $19 trillion number. And surprise, surprise, Donald Trump lied again. Now, Donald Trump has been talking about since he put the tariffs on, and he wants to rave about how successful they are. He had been talking about giving people a $2,000 tariff rebate check. Well, Congress would have to approve that expenditure, and they haven't done that yet. But beyond that, there's 330 million roughly Americans in this country. A $2,000 rebate check would be $660 billion, or almost all of that cash on hand. Which means if at most, if every penny sitting there is money from tariffs, that's 774 billion total that we have ever collected. And if they're going to pay out 660 billion in tariff rebate checks, well, that means it was basically be a wash almost. And what's the point again, of doing it all? But see, Donald Trump doesn't care about that. He wanted the headline of, I'm taking care of you, I'm going to make things better. Now, when it comes to these tariff rebate checks, Donald Trump was asked recently by a reporter, when should the American people expect these $2,000 refund checks you were talking about? He comes back with first a surprised look, and he's like, did I say that? When did I say I was going to do that? Because he legitimately does not remember. He's having memory issues and he's having dementia problems. We talk about it all the time. So he doesn't remember ever promising tariff rebate checks, and that's part of the problem here. He's making promises he can't go through with, and it's leading to other issues like this, where people are expecting these refund checks and they're not going to happen. Anybody who actually thought he was going to succeed in sending out a tariff rebate check are the same people still waiting for their Doge rebate checks that think those $5,000 checks are coming any day now. They're not happening, okay? You're not going to get either set of rebate checks. It's just not going to be a thing that happens. The money's not there to do it. It was something to lure you in and make you think that things were going to happen. Now, Donald Trump has been going after Fed Chair Jerome Powell, and he wants to get rid of Jerome Powell because Jerome Powell is not lowering the interest rate fast enough for Donald Trump's liking. First of all, the Fed has always operated separate from Donald Trump or the presidency for that matter. They do whatever they want because they look at long-term financial forecasts. And they have teams of experts who look at nothing but raw data, and they are trying to keep inflation in a certain bubble, and they're trying to do things to make everything to keep inflation from going too high year over year. And they're trying to do things about keeping the economy on track. And they set the pace for what happens with the interest rate. Now, Donald Trump wants low interest rates. Why? Because he wants it cheap to borrow money. Because one, he wants him and his friends to be able to borrow money inexpensively, because that's what he cares about. And two, he wants it to go back to how it was right around the end of COVID, when it was really cheap to borrow money and people were looking at borrowing money because it started to spur the economy. If it does not cost a lot of money, you can go out and start a business if you have a little bit of collateral. If it doesn't cost a lot of money, you can turn around, if the interest isn't outrageous, you're going to go buy that vehicle. As somebody who recently had to look at what to do when it came to a vehicle, uh, interest rates are high. And even if you can get in at 7 or 8%, that's still very high to do when it comes to interest, and you got to think about all that. And Donald Trump wants the interest rate lower, and he's been trying to pressure Jerome Powell for a year now to lower the rates. He wants it dropped like 2 or 3%. He wants rates down under 3%. At one time, he said he wanted something like 1.5%, which, when money is that cheap to borrow, it is inflationary, because a lot of people who can afford to borrow will go out. Yes, they will spur the economy. But when everybody is spurring the economy all at the same time, it can lead to rapid inflation, and inflation's already out of control. The Fed is trying to balance this whole act here, and Donald Trump could care less. So he's been trying to pressure Jerome Powell. Okay. Well, his latest move to pressure Jerome Powell has been to announce a DOJ investigation into Jerome Powell. And this is in regards to the fact that they are remodeling the Federal Reserve building, and it's behind schedule and over budget. But that happens a lot of time when you're dealing with uh, historic buildings and you're trying to do things and preserve them at the same time. Now, Donald Trump does not care about preserving history. If he did, he would not have torn down the East Wing without any sort of authorization or anything like that. And by the way he tore down the East Wing, he didn't care about preserving anything. So he just thinks Jerome Powell is wasting all this money. Now they're going to launch an investigation into it to see if he is actually wasting money, etc. And he's trying to bring charges against Jerome Powell. Well, there was a senator, and I can't think of his name now, from Kansas. Apologize for blanking on his name, but he came out and he said that he thinks Donald Trump is just trolling Jerome Powell, trying to get him to do what he wants. And at what point, when did trolling become the appropriate way for a president to act? And trolling with criminal investigations, even. It's just ridiculousness coming out of Donald Trump. Now, uh, Tom Tillis, I believe, from North Carolina, came out and he said, and he's head of uh, one of the finance committees in the Senate, he came out and said he's going to block all appointments to the Federal Reserve that Donald Trump makes, as long as these investigations are ongoing, and basically if Donald Trump doesn't knock his shit off. And that's a stronger approach coming from a Republican. Now, Republicans are having to choose sides here. Are they going to side with Donald Trump and keep bootlicking like Randy Fine in Florida, like I was talking about with doing the Powers Act to allow him to acquire Greenland? Or are they going to break away? And I think ultimately more are going to start to break away. The closer we get to the midterms, the closer we get to midterm primaries, especially if they face any sort of credible primary challenger. And the primaries start as early as the beginning of March, is when the voting is actually going to happen. Now, some of the first states, there's already ads underway, and it could also change tunes with some members of Congress if they get, you know, even if they survive their primary or their primary hasn't come up yet, but if other long-term members get primaried out by radical right-leaning Trump-supporting MAGAs, they may start changing their tune and acting a little differently because they are worried about getting primaried out. And they may start putting up more of a fight, not less, because Donald Trump would want less of a fight. But they may have to end up going with more of a fight so that way more independents and other voters actually try to save them in the midterms. Republicans and, well, politicians in general care about their own power above and beyond anything else. And I've been saying for a long time that I think when push comes to shove and Republicans are worried about getting their asses handed to them on a platter, that they are going to turn on Donald Trump. Now, between now and the November elections, a lot of things could happen. Donald Trump could end up being in the Epstein files, and that's entirely possible. It's pretty evident that he is at least connected to Epstein, but his connection could end up being even deeper than we know. And if that proves out, Republicans may have no choice but to walk away from Donald Trump and say, okay, we're removing you. His health could take a shit, even worse than it already is. He's already appearing forgetful. He's got weird bruising, doesn't remember things, and it appears that he could be getting IV treatments of some kind based on the bruisings on his hands, among other things. And then there was an image that came out, another official image of the president, where he's leaned forward and he's kind of got his hands on the desk, like he's mean mugging, like he looks like he's this tough guy, or at least that's what he's trying to do. And a lot of people correlated it to but the way he is standing in his posture would be the same if the desk wasn't there that he's leaning on and he was actually leaning on a walker. Donald Trump is trying to make it look like he is this epitome of health and vigor, and he really isn't. So Republicans, as the midterms are coming up, are going to have to worry about his health. Does it take a shit? Are they going to have to use the 25th Amendment and remove him? Is everything with Greenland going to be enough for them to impeach and remove him? Or is it going to be the stuff with the Federal Reserve Chair? Or is it the Epstein files? And as it gets closer and it's looking like they are going to get annihilated, they may move on him before the midterms. But that may be too little too late. They may actually wait till after they get annihilated in that sweet spot between the election and the swearing in of the new Congress, where a lot of the Republican members of Congress could be out of jobs, and they could turn around and say, okay, well, for the good of the party, we need to get rid of this guy, impeach and remove him, then setting up JD Vance, because the whole idea would be to give JD Vance a compelling narrative so that they could say, well, see, he had 2 years of a democratically controlled Congress. He needs 4 more to be president, with Republicans in control, so he could actually get something done and fix the mess left by Biden. That way, they could spend another 2 years trying to blame the Democrats for all of the problems and nothing actually getting fixed. I can see exactly how this plays out. But JD Vance is not well liked, and he's not doing himself any favors. So there is entirely the possibility that JD Vance ends up not even getting the nominee as the incumbent VP or potentially the incumbent president, depending on what the Republicans do with Donald Trump. That other people enter the race, and one of the names being floated is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is talking about entering the race yet again, that he may end up trying to make a move. And here's the thing, Ted Cruz is relatively a big name Republican, only because everybody knows who Ted Cruz is. And he could end up making a play for the nomination. And other big name Republicans wouldn't be entering if they thought JD Vance was going to be a serious contender for 28. So we'll have to see how the midterms play out and how everything turns up. But the Republicans are right now split, and the split is getting worse. They're splitting within their own party as far as who's running in 28. They're already talking about maybe bypassing JD Vance. You got varying members of Congress already bucking Donald Trump, saying, "Okay, we're gonna block the things you do because you're doing this." You got other ones trying to lick his boots and do even more. This is not a cohesive party, and they are proving every single day that they do not understand how to govern, and it's going to get worse before it gets better, I'm afraid. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. This is going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast. I do hope you have a great day, and I will be back again tomorrow because there's always stuff to talk about.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.